The great hall of the Ashenmore pack smelled of cedar smoke and winter fir, and every wolf in attendance could taste the tension on the air like copper on the tongue. Sable Voss stood in the center of the stone floor, her hands loose at her sides, her chin level. Not lifted in defiance, not dropped in shame, just level, as though someone had told her exactly what was about to happen, and she had already finished grieving it. Alpha Cale Ashworth stood 3 steps above her on the dais, his jaw locked so tight the tendons in his neck stood out like cables. Behind him, the pack's council of elders sat in their carved chairs, faces unreadable. His mother, the former Luna, pressed her thumb and forefinger against the bridge of her nose. "I, Cale Ashworth, Alpha of the Ashenmore pack," he said, and his voice carried the weight of command that made the wolves along the walls lower their eyes, reject the mate bond between myself and Sable Voss. The hall went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence where you could hear the candle wax dripping from the iron chandeliers. Every wolf present could smell what was happening. The bond, that invisible tether forged by something older than language, older than packs, older than the moon itself, was being severed in public. And severing a bond was not clean. It was not surgical. It smelled like burning sage and open wounds. It tasted, to every wolf in the hall, like ash. Sable blinked once. Then she reached up and unclasped the thin iron chain she wore around her neck. A small pendant hung from it, an unpolished piece of amber, the color of dark honey. She had worn it since she was 14, when her mother had pressed it into her palm the night before she died and whispered, "You'll know when to let it go." Sable set the pendant on the stone floor between them. "I accept your rejection," she said. Her voice didn't waver. It didn't crack. It was the voice of someone who had practiced this moment so many times in the dark that the words had lost their edges. And then she turned and walked toward the doors. No one moved. No one spoke. A few of the younger wolves exchanged confused glances they had expected, tears, or pleading, or the wild keening of a wolf whose bond was being torn from its chest. That was the way rejection worked. It was supposed to break the rejected. It was supposed to be ugly. But Sable Voss walked with her spine straight, and her footsteps even, and the only sound was the soft click of her boots on the stone, and the faint, involuntary whine from somewhere deep in Cale Ashworth's throat that he could not suppress. She didn't look back. The doors closed behind her, and a heartbeat later, the air in the great hall changed, not gradually, but all at once, like a window shattering inward. A pressure none of them had been aware of until that moment slammed into the room with such force that 3 of the elders rose involuntarily from their seats. A scent rolled through the hall. Not cedar, not winter fir. Blood iron, pine resin, deep earth after lightning. The scent of a king. 3 years earlier, Sable had arrived at the Ashenmore compound on a Tuesday in late autumn, riding in the back of a supply truck that delivered grain and canned goods to the pack's kitchens. She was 17. She carried a canvas bag with 2 changes of clothes, a water-stained copy of a field guide to North American wildflowers, and the amber pendant. She had no pack scent. That was the first thing anyone noticed. In the world of shifters, scent was identity. Your scent told other wolves which pack you belonged to, whether you were dominant or submissive, whether you were healthy or sick, grieving or joyful. Scent was the language beneath language, the truth that words could not disguise. Sable had none. The kitchen supervisor, a broad-shouldered woman named Marin, had studied her for a long time before allowing her inside. "You don't smell like anything," Marin said. It was not a compliment. "I know," Sable said. "That's not normal. I know that too." Marin assigned her to the lowest position in the pack hierarchy. Kitchen labor. Cleaning, hauling, peeling, scrubbing. Sable accepted without complaint. She worked in silence, ate alone, and slept in a narrow room above the storage cellar that smelled of onions and cold stone. Within a week, rumors spread through the pack like fever. She was a rogue. She was cursed. She was half-human. She had been exiled from another pack for some crime no one could name, but everyone was eager to invent. The absence of scent made her a blank canvas for suspicion, and wolves, Sable had learned, were creatures who needed every mystery solved or destroyed. Only one person treated her with any warmth. Yorin Ashworth, Cale's younger brother, found her one evening sitting on the back steps of the kitchen, reading her wildflower guide by the last light of the day. "What's that?" he asked, sitting down beside her without invitation. "A book," she said. "I can see it's a book." He tilted his head, reading the spine. "You like plants? I like knowing what things are, what they're called, what they do." Yorin nodded slowly. He was 18, lean and quiet, with none of the imposing physical authority that clung to his older brother like a second skin. Where Kyle was granite, Jorin was water gentle, curious, always finding the path of least resistance. "My brother says we should send you away," Jorin said, with the guileless honesty of someone who had never been punished for speaking the truth. "I figured. He says a wolf without a scent is either broken or hiding something." Sable closed the book. "What do you think?" Jorin studied her face. His eyes were hazel, warm, and they moved across her features with a quiet attention that was not predatory but diagnostic, as though he were trying to understand the machinery behind her stillness. "I think," he said, "you're just sad." Sable looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the book again and turned to a page near the front. "Monotropa uniflora," she said, pointing to an illustration. "Ghost pipe. It has no chlorophyll. It doesn't photosynthesize. It gets all its nutrients from underground fungal networks connected to other trees." She paused. "People used to think it was a parasite, but it isn't. It's just surviving a different way." Jorin smiled, a small, careful thing. "Ghost pipe," he repeated. "I'll remember that." Sable was 19 when the bond declared itself. It happened on the spring equinox, during the pack's annual gathering in the Great Hall. Every wolf was present. The ceremony involved the lighting of a central fire, and each family sent a representative forward to feed a branch into the flames, a symbol of unity and continuity. Sable had been instructed to remain in the kitchen during the ceremony. She was not a family. She had no branch. But Jorin had slipped her a sprig of dried rosemary and told her to stand in the back, just to watch. When Cale Ashworth stepped forward to light his family's branch, the fire surged, and Sable felt the world crack open. It was not romantic. It was not gentle. It was a detonation in the center of her chest, a pressure so immense that her knees buckled. Her vision narrowed to a single point, Cale's face, illuminated by firelight, his dark eyes wide with an expression she would only later understand was horror, because he felt it too. The bond snapped into place like a steel cable drawn taut between them, and for one breathless moment, the entire hall could smell it, the intertwining of scents, the invisible chemistry that the wolf world considered sacred and irrefutable. But then something else happened, something that made every elder rise from their seat, and every wolf in the room tilt their head in confusion. Sable's scent, absent for 2 years, erupted, and it was overwhelming. Not the scent of a low-ranking kitchen worker, not the scent of a broken wolf or a rogue. Her scent was deep and layered, and ancient winter moss and white cedar, and something beneath that, something the older wolves recognized with widening eyes, the scent of a bloodline long thought extinct. "Voss," one of the elders whispered, gripping the arm of his chair. The Night Hollow line. The Night Hollow wolves had been one of the founding bloodlines of shifter society, pacifists, mediators, keepers of the old laws. They had been systematically hunted and destroyed 3 generations ago by a coalition of packs that feared their influence. The official history said they were extinct. The unofficial history said they had been murdered. And now, standing in the back of the great hall with a sprig of rosemary in her hand and tears she refused to shed burning in her eyes, was their last descendant. Cale stared at her from the dais. The bond was screaming inside his chest. She could see it in the way his hand trembled, the way his nostrils flared, but his face was already shutting down, locking into the granite mask that his role demanded, because Cale Ashworth had been promised to someone else. Her name was Petra Langston, and she was the daughter of the alpha of the Greymere Pack, Ashenmoor's most powerful ally. The marriage had been arranged when Cale was 16. It was not a love match. It was a treaty, written in vows instead of ink, designed to prevent a war that had been simmering between the northern and eastern packs for decades. Petra was beautiful, ambitious, and ruthlessly pragmatic. She arrived at Ashenmoor the day after the equinox, and if she noticed the change in the air, the way Kale flinched when Sable's scent drifted through the corridors, the way the pack whispered behind their hands, she gave no sign. "The bond is inconvenient," she told Kale the first evening, standing in his study with her arms folded. "But inconvenience is not destiny." "She's Night Hollow," Kale said. He was standing at the window, watching the tree line as though expecting something to emerge from the shadows. "If the other packs find out, then we control the narrative." Petra's voice was calm, clinical. "You reject the bond publicly. Formally. It will hurt. The bond always does, but you'll survive it. And more importantly, the Alliance survives it. If you choose her, a ghost, a girl with no family, no allies, no pack standing, Greymere withdraws. And you know what follows Greymere. War. That was what followed. 3 packs bound to Greymere by blood and obligation, all of them with grudges older than Kale's grandfather. "She hasn't asked me for anything," Kale said quietly. "She doesn't have to. The bond asks for her. That's the danger." Kyle pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Through the floor, through the walls, through the impossible distance of stone and wood and winter air, he could feel her, a constant low hum, like a plucked string that would not stop vibrating. What Petra didn't know, what no one knew, was that Kyle had gone to Sable the night before. He had found her in the herb garden behind the kitchen, kneeling in the cold soil, transplanting seedlings by moonlight. She didn't look up when he approached. She didn't need to. The bond told her exactly who he was, how close he stood, how fast his heart was beating. "You should go," she said, pressing soil around a pale green stem with careful fingers. "I needed to. You needed to see if the bond was as strong as it feels. It is. Now go. Sable, don't." She finally looked up, and her eyes, gray, wide, steady, held something he had not expected. Not anger, not longing, understanding. "I know what you're going to do. I've known since the moment the bond hit. I could feel your decision forming before you made it. That's what Night Hollow blood does. We feel the architecture of a choice before it's built." Kale's breath caught. "Then you know I don't want to. It doesn't matter what you want. It matters what you choose." She returned to the soil. "Go choose, Kale." He stood there for a long time. Then he left. The amber pendant, which Sable had removed from her neck and set beside her in the dirt, caught the moonlight and held it like a small, imprisoned sun. The rejection ceremony was held. 5 days later, the entire pack was required to attend. It was tradition. A rejection, like a bonding, was a public act, witnessed and recorded. The elders sat in their chairs. Petra stood behind the dais, her posture immaculate, her expression serene. Joran stood at the far left wall, his hands balled into fists, his face white. Sable walked to the center of the hall and waited. Kyle spoke the words, and Sable, who had practiced this moment in the dark, who had pressed her nails into her palms until the skin broke, who had learned to control her scent and her heartbeat, and her tears with the discipline of a woman raised to survive extinction, set the amber pendant on the stone floor and walked away. The doors closed behind her, and then the air broke. No one in the Ashenmoor pack had ever seen an Alpha King. The title was ancient, older than pack law, older than territorial boundaries. The Alpha King was not elected or inherited. The Alpha King was recognized by the land itself, by the deep currents of instinct and power that flowed beneath the surface of the shifter world like underground rivers. There had not been one in 4 generations. When the doors of the great hall blew inward, not opened, not pushed, but blown, as though by a wind that had no source, the man who walked through them was not what anyone expected. He was not massive. He was not armored. He was not surrounded by warriors. He was alone. He wore a heavy wool coat the color of charcoal, and his dark hair was streaked with early silver at the temples. His face was weathered, angular, and his eyes pale green. The color of lichen on granite moved across the room with the slow, absolute attention of a predator who had already assessed every threat and found none worthy of concern. His scent hit the hall like a wave. Every wolf in the room felt it felt their knees soften, their wolves drop low in instinctive submission. It was not cruelty. It was not domination. It was gravity, the same force that kept the moon in orbit and the tides in rhythm. Elara Ashworth, the former Luna, was the first to stand. "Rendell," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. The Alpha King Rendell Voss stopped in the center of the hall, exactly where Sable had stood moments before. He looked down at the amber pendant on the stone floor. He knelt, slowly, and picked it up. Then he looked at Kyle. "Where?" he said. And the word was so quiet that it should have been swallowed by the vastness of the hall. But every wolf heard it as clearly as if he had spoken directly into their ear. "Is my granddaughter?" The silence that followed lasted 7 seconds. Sable would learn this later, that her grandfather had counted them, because he was a man who measured silences the way other men measured distance, and 7 seconds of silence from a room of 60 wolves told him everything he needed to know. Kale was the first to recover. "Your granddaughter, Sable Voss, daughter of Lyrian Voss. My blood." Rendell stood, the amber pendant cupped in his palm. He looked at it the way one looks at a photograph of the dead, with tenderness so sharp it becomes indistinguishable from pain. "I gave this to my daughter when she was 7 years old. The amber is from the old forest, the Night Hollow Grove. It's the only piece of that forest that still exists." He closed his fingers around it. "I have been searching for Sable for 6 years. I traced her through human cities, rogue camps, 3 separate foster systems. I was 200 miles from here when I felt the bond break." His pale eyes found Kale again. "That is how strong your rejection was, Alpha Ashworth. I felt a 17-year-old bond fragment snap from the distance of a mountain range." Joran stepped forward from the wall. "She left. She walked out. I know where she is." Rendell's gaze flickered to Joran, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You were kind to her. It was not a question." "She's my friend," Joran said. "Yes." She spoke of a boy who showed her kindness. She mentioned Rosemary. Rendell turned back to the room. "I am not here to make war. I am not here to punish. I am here for my family, what remains of it. But I will speak plainly." He looked at Kyle. "You rejected a Night Hollow wolf in a public ceremony. You rejected the mate bond, the bond that this world considers the most sacred covenant possible for a political marriage." He paused. "That is your right, under pack law. I will not dispute it." Something shifted in the room. The wolves who had been bracing for violence now leaned forward with uncertainty. "But you should know," Rendell continued, "that the Night Hollow bloodline carries a particular gift. When a Night Hollow wolf bonds, the bond does not simply connect 2 individuals. It stabilizes the land, the territory, the pack itself. It is why Night Hollow wolves were hunted not because we were powerful, but because without us, the territories destabilize. The old forests die. The wolves become brittle, aggressive, afraid." He let the words settle. "Your territory, Alpha Ashworth, has been in decline for 11 years. Your game herds have thinned. Your wolves report more frequent rogue incursions. Your children shift later than they should." He looked at the elders. "You know this. You've felt it." No one argued. "That decline began the year the last Night Hollow in your region was killed. My daughter, Lyrian, was that wolf. She was 26 years old. Your father's pack did not kill her, but his allies did, and he did nothing to stop it." Elara Ashworth closed her eyes. "I did not come here to reopen that wound," Rendell said. "But you should understand the full weight of what happened in this room tonight. You have not merely rejected a girl. You have rejected the only living force that could heal your territory. And you did it because you were afraid of a war that the Night Hollow bond would have prevented." He turned toward the doors. "I will collect my granddaughter. We will leave by morning. I suggest you pray that the decline of your territory proceeds slowly." He was nearly at the doors when Kale's voice stopped him. "Wait." Rendell paused but did not turn. "Sable never told me any of this. She never told me about the Night Hollow gifts, about the territory, about any of it." Now Rendell turned, and for the first time his composure showed its seams a flicker of grief, old and deep, crossing his face like the shadow of a cloud. "No," he said. "She wouldn't have. Because the Night Hollow gift cannot be offered. It only works through a bond that is freely chosen. If she had told you, the bond would have been tainted by obligation. She was protecting the only thing that mattered. Your freedom to choose." He looked at Cale with something that was not anger but a sorrow so vast it seemed to fill the room. "And you chose." Sable was sitting on a fallen birch tree a quarter-mile from the compound when Rendell found her. She was not crying. She had done her crying in the herb garden, silently. The way her mother had taught her, tears are not weakness, but they are private, and now she was simply sitting, watching the way the moonlight filtered through the bare branches and made silver patterns on the snow. She heard him before she smelled him, the measured crunch of boots on frozen ground. And then the scent reached her, and her wolf, still raw and shaking from the broken bond, lifted its head with a recognition so profound that Sable's breath stuttered. "Family, pack, home, grandfather," she said without turning. Rendell sat down beside her on the birch. He did not speak for a long time. They watched the snow together. Finally, he set the amber pendant on the log between them. "Your mother wanted you to have this for the moment you let go of something that wasn't yours to keep." Sable looked at the pendant. In the moonlight, the amber glowed faintly, as though something alive moved inside it. "I thought it meant something else," she said. "I thought it meant I should let go of her. Perhaps it meant both." Sable picked it up. The chain was cold, but the amber was warm, warmer than it should have been, as though it had been sitting in sunlight instead of on a frozen stone floor. "He didn't want to reject me," she said quietly. "No, he was protecting his pack. He was protecting what he understood his pack to be." "That is not the same thing." Sable turned the pendant in her fingers. "Do I hate him? Do you?" She considered this honestly, the way she considered everything, with the slow, thorough attention she gave to identifying a wildflower by its leaves and its roots, and the quality of the soil it grew in. "No," she said. "I'm just tired." Rendell put his arm around her. She leaned into him, this stranger who was also the only family she had left, this king who smelled like pine resin and deep earth, and something that made her wolf, for the first time in years, feel safe. "Then rest," he said. "We have a long road." In the weeks following the rejection, Cale Ashworth discovered 3 things he had not anticipated. The first was that rejecting a mate bond did not end it cleanly. It was supposed to, the old texts were clear. The elders confirmed it. A public rejection, formally accepted, severed the bond. But Cale still felt her. Not the way he had before, not the constant, living hum of her presence. Instead, there was an absence so specific, so precisely shaped, that it functioned as its own kind of presence. A phantom limb. A silence that had a sound. The second discovery was that Rendell Voss had been right about the territory. Within a month of Sable's departure, 3 deer herds abandoned their traditional grazing lands on Ashenmoor's eastern border. A creek that had fed the training grounds for a century slowed to a trickle, then stopped entirely. 2 litters of pups failed to shift by their expected age, and the pack healer, a woman named Osla, who had served 4 generations of Ashworths, reported a phenomenon she had never encountered. The medicinal herbs in her garden were dying from the roots up, as though the soil itself had withdrawn its nourishment. The third discovery was about Petra. Kyle was in his study, reviewing supply reports that showed increasingly dire numbers when Joran appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk," Joran said. His scent was sharp anger masked by control, the way a river masks its current beneath a still surface. "About what?" "About the fact that Petra has been sending letters to the Valcrest pack." Cale looked up. "Valcrest is neutral territory. What letters?" Joran set a leather folio on the desk. "I intercepted these from the courier this morning. Read them." Cale read. The letters, carefully worded, diplomatically precise, revealed a negotiation that predated the rejection by months. Petra had been in contact with the Valcrest Alpha before she ever arrived at Ashenmoor. The subject of the correspondence was not the Greymere alliance. It was the Night Hollow bloodline. Petra had known about Sable before the equinox. She had known what a Night Hollow bond could do, not the version Rendell had described to the Hall, but a darker version. One that focused not on territory stabilization but on power amplification. The old texts disagreed on the precise nature of the Night Hollow gift. One interpretation said healing, another said dominion. Petra had come to Ashenmoor not to secure a marriage, but to ensure that the Night Hollow line remained broken. Because if a Night Hollow wolf bonded with an alpha, truly bonded, freely chosen, that alpha's power would amplify beyond anything the current pack system could contain, and that would threaten every alliance, every border, every carefully maintained balance of power in the shifter world. The rejection hadn't been Kale's idea. It had been Petra's. She had simply made him believe it was his own. Kale sat very still for a long time, the letters spread before him like a map of his own manipulation. "How long have you known?" he asked Joran. "I suspected since the equinox, but I wanted proof." Joran's voice was steady, but his hands, gripping the back of a chair, were white-knuckled. "She played you, Kale. She played all of us. She threatened war. The Greymere Alliance was never in danger. I checked. I traveled to Greymere myself, 2 weeks ago, without telling anyone. Her father doesn't want war. He never did. He wants stability. And he didn't know about the Night Hollow heritage until Petra told him, and she told him a version designed to make him afraid." Kyle stared at his brother. "You went to Greymere alone?" Someone had to do something besides stand at a window and feel sorry for himself. The silence between them was not hostile. It was the silence of two brothers realizing, at the same moment, that the ground they'd built their lives on had shifted beneath their feet. "I have to find her," Kale said. "I know," Joran said. "But Kyle, you need to understand something first. You broke the bond publicly. She accepted the rejection. Even if you find her, even if you explain the bond doesn't just reassemble because you're sorry, then what do I do?" Joran looked at him with an expression that was part compassion and part steel. "You start by earning something you were given for free and threw away. 300 miles north of Ashenmoor, in a valley so old that the trees had names, Sable was learning to be a Night Hollow. Rendell's territory was not like any packland she had encountered. There were no fences, no patrols, no hierarchical compound. Instead, there was the Grove, a vast, ancient forest of white cedar and black spruce, where the air tasted of resin, and the soil hummed with a frequency that Sable could feel in her bones. There were other wolves here, not many, perhaps 30, and they were all, in one way or another, broken. Refugees, exiles, wolves who had lost their packs to violence or politics, or the slow erosion of trust. Rendell had gathered them over decades, not as subjects but as family. "The Night Hollow gift," he told her one evening, as they sat beside a fire in the central clearing, "is not power, it's resonance. We feel the connections between things, between wolves and land, between choice and consequence. When we bond, those connections strengthen. When we're destroyed, they decay." "And the other interpretation?" Sable asked. "The one about dominion?" Rendell's face grew still. "That interpretation was created by wolves who were afraid. They saw resonance and called it control, because control was the only framework they understood." Sable stared into the fire. The amber pendant hung from her neck again. In the weeks since leaving Ashenmoor, she had noticed something. The amber was changing, growing warmer, developing at its center. A faint pulse of light that appeared only in darkness. "The pendant is waking up," Rendell said, following her gaze. "It's been dormant since your mother died. It responds to Night Hollow blood that has begun to heal." "I don't feel healed." "Healing is not a feeling. It's a direction." Over the following months, Sable trained. Not in combat, though she learned to fight, her body filling out with a lean, fierce strength that surprised her, but in perception. The Night Hollow discipline was about listening to the land, to the wolves, to the invisible web of connections that held the shifter world together. She learned to feel the borders of territories hundreds of miles away. She learned to sense, through the soles of her feet against the forest floor, whether a wolf was lying or telling the truth. She learned that her absent scent had not been a deficiency but a defense, a Night Hollow cub's instinctive camouflage, triggered by the trauma of her mother's death, hiding her bloodline from those who would destroy it. And slowly, painfully, She learned to feel the broken place where the bond had been. It was not gone. Rendell had been right. It was not the clean severance the old texts described. It was a wound, ragged and deep, and it ached with a persistence that no training could quiet. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked one night. Rendell looked at her for a long time. "Your grandmother was my mate. She was killed 31 years ago." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The first snow of the new year had just fallen when the messenger arrived at the Night Hollow Grove. It was Joran. He came alone, on foot, carrying nothing but a leather pack and an expression of someone who had been walking for a very long time and was not sure he had the right to stop. Sable met him at the edge of the grove. She had felt him coming for 2 days, his scent, warm and familiar, threading through the forest like a current in a stream. "You look different," Joran said. She did. The hollowness that had defined her at Ashenmoor was gone. She stood with the rooted stillness of someone who had found, at last, the ground beneath her feet. Her gray eyes were clear and alert, and her scent openly night hollow now. Winter moss and white cedar and the deep, resonant hum of old forest was so rich that Joran had to steady himself against it. "You look exhausted," she said. "Fair." He smiled, and it was the same careful smile he'd offered her years ago on the kitchen steps. "Can we talk?" They sat on a flat rock beside a frozen stream. Joran told her everything: Petra's letters, the manipulation, Cale's discovery. Sable listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Is he here?" she asked. "No. He wanted to come. I told him not to." "Why?" Joran hesitated. This was the part he'd been dreading. "Because I needed to tell you something first. Something that changes things." He took a breath. "Sable. He stopped. Started again. "When I went to Greymere, when I investigated Petra's letters, I didn't do it just for Cale. I did it because watching you walk out of that hall was the worst moment of my life. Not because of the bond, because of you. Because you're the only person I've ever known who made me feel like being gentle wasn't the same as being weak." The stream creaked beneath its ice. "Joran," Sable said softly, "I'm not asking for anything. I know you're bonded to my brother. Even broken, the bond is his. I know that. I couldn't let you think that no one fought for you. Because I did. I am." Sable reached out and took his hand. His skin was cold. She held it until it was warm. "You were the first person who ever saw me," she said. "Not my scent, not my bloodline, not my bond. Me. You saw the girl reading a book on the kitchen steps, and you sat down." "Ghost pipe," Joran said, and his voice cracked. "Ghost pipe," she agreed. They sat together in the cold until the stars came out. Spring came to the Night Hollow Grove like a held breath finally released. The snow receded, the streams unlocked, and the white cedars put out new growth so vivid it seemed to glow. Sable had made her decision. "I'm going back to Ashenmoor," she told Rendell. He studied her face. "Why?" "Because the territory is dying. Because there are pups who can't shift and a healer whose garden is turning to dust. Because you told me that the Night Hollow gift only works through a bond that is freely chosen, and I need to understand what that means for myself. It could mean pain. It already means pain, at least this way. The pain has a direction." Rendell nodded slowly. Then he reached into the pocket of his coat and withdrew a small, folded piece of leather. Inside was a ring iron, unadorned, warm to the touch. "Your grandmother's," he said. "She wore it when she bonded with me. Iron from the old forest, like the amber. The Night Hollow Grove remembers every bond that was ever formed within it." Sable turned the ring in her fingers. It was simple and heavy, and it pulsed faintly against her skin, in time with a heartbeat she could not hear but recognized not Cale's, not Joran's, but the heartbeat of the forest itself. She wore it on a chain beside the amber pendant, and when she walked out of the grove the next morning, the trees rustled in a wind that had no source, and the 30 wolves of Rendell's pack stood in a line along the ridge and watched her go. She arrived at Ashenmoor on a Tuesday, the same day of the week she had arrived 3 years earlier, though she did not plan it that way. The compound looked worse than she remembered. The training grounds were waterlogged. The gardens were sparse. The great hall's cedar pillars, once fragrant and warm, smelled faintly of decay. She walked through the main gate in full daylight, and her scent preceded her like a herald. Wolves emerged from doorways, from the training yard, from the kitchen. They stopped and stared. Some of them recognized her. Most of them recognized what she was. The scent was unmistakable now, rich and ancient, and vibrating with a resonance that made every wolf's instincts snap to attention. Marin, the kitchen supervisor, was standing in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Sable for a long time. "You smell like something now," she said. "I always did," Sable replied. "You just couldn't hear it." Kale met her in the great hall. He was standing on the dais, not by choice but because he had been reviewing supply reports with his council when her scent reached him, and the shock of it had frozen him in place. He looked older, not aged, but worn, the way a cliff face looks after a season of hard weather. His eyes were dark and raw, and he did not try to hide what was in them. "Sable, Alpha Ashworth." Her voice was steady. "I'm not here because of the bond." "Then why?" "Because your territory is dying, and I can help. Not because I'm your mate, you rejected that. Not because I owe you anything I don't. But because there are children in this pack who deserve to shift, and a forest that deserves to live, and a healer who deserves a garden that grows." She paused. "I am here as a Night Hollow, not as your rejected mate. I will do what my bloodline was meant to do, stabilize this land. And when it's done, I will leave." Kale descended the dais slowly. He stopped 3 feet from her. The distance was deliberate, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to respect the boundary she had drawn. "Petra is gone," he said. "I sent her back to Greymere. The truth about her letters is known." "Good. I was manipulated." "Yes. But the words were still yours, Kale. The rejection was spoken in your voice. Your hand signed the bond's severance. Manipulation doesn't erase choice. It just means the choice was made with incomplete information." He flinched. Not visibly, not in a way anyone watching would have noticed. But Sable felt it through the broken bond, through the ghost thread that still connected them, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the corresponding ache in her own chest. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "Good. Because I can't yet." "Yet?" She looked at him. The gray eyes that had been hollow were now filled with something complex and formidable. Not love, not yet, but the raw material from which love could be built if given time and truth, and the kind of patience that most people mistake for weakness. "Yet," she repeated. And she walked past him to begin her work. The healing of Ashenmoor took 3 months. Sable worked the way her grandfather had taught her, slowly, from the ground up, listening before acting. She walked the territory barefoot, even in the lingering cold of early spring, pressing her soles against the earth until she could feel the broken connections beneath the surface, the severed fungal networks, the depleted aquifers, the wounded ley lines that had once carried the territory's vitality like blood through veins. She did not do this alone. Jorin walked with her, carrying her wildflower guide and marking the locations she indicated on a hand-drawn map. He did not ask about the bond or about Kale. He talked about birds and weather and the way the light changed in the late afternoon, and Sable was grateful for his presence in a way that went deeper than romance or attraction. It was the gratitude of someone who had been alone for a very long time and had finally found a witness to her life. Osla, the pack healer, became an unlikely ally. The old woman was skeptical at first. She had served Ashworths for decades and was not inclined to trust a Night Hollow, regardless of bloodline. But when Sable knelt in her dying garden and placed both hands flat against the soil, and the rosemary bushes put out new growth within the hour, Osla sat down on her stool and said, very quietly, "Well, I suppose I owe you an apology." "You owe me nothing," Sable said, "but I could use your help understanding which medicinal plants this territory needs most." They worked side by side through the spring. The garden came back first, then the streams, then the grazing lands. The deer herds returned. The creek that fed the training grounds swelled to its old volume and then exceeded it, running clear and fast over stones that had been dry for months. And the pups shifted. 3 of them, on the same night, under a full moon so bright it cast shadows sharp as blades. Their parents wept. Osla wept. Even Marin, standing at the kitchen window, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Through it all, Kael watched. He did not hover. He did not try to insert himself into her work or claim credit for the recovery. He attended to his duties, supply management, patrol schedules, the diplomatic correspondence required by a dozen uneasy alliances, and in the evenings, when the compound settled into quiet, he sometimes found himself standing at the edge of the herb garden, watching Sable work by moonlight. She always knew he was there. She never told him to leave. One evening, as the last frost of spring was melting from the ground, he brought her a cup of tea. "Osla said you forgot to eat again," he said, setting the cup on the garden wall. "Osla worries. Osla is right." Sable sat back on her heels and looked at him. The moonlight caught the amber pendant at her throat and the iron ring beside it, and for a moment, both glowed with a faint, warm light. "Sit down, Kael," she said. He sat. They drank tea together in the garden where he had once found her transplanting seedlings in the dark, and they did not talk about the bond or the rejection or the choices that had led them to this quiet, fragile moment. They talked about the territory, about the pups, about Joran's terrible map-reading skills and Osla's surprisingly filthy sense of humor. They talked the way two people talk when they are learning, slowly and carefully, to trust the ground beneath their feet. And when Kael finally rose to leave, Sable said, "Thank you for the tea." It was nothing. It was everything. The amber pendant pulsed once, warm against her skin, and the iron ring hummed in answer. Midsummer. The Ashenmoor pack gathered in the great hall for the solstice ceremony, the lighting of the central fire, the offering of branches. It was the same ceremony that had revealed the bond a year and a half earlier, and the same hall where the bond had been broken. But the hall was different now. The cedar pillars, restored by months of night hollow resonance, filled the air with their warm, resinous scent. New candles burned in the iron chandeliers. The stone floor was scattered with fresh spruce boughs, and through the open windows, the sound of the restored creek reached them like distant music. Sable stood at the back of the hall, as she had on the equinox that changed everything. But this time, she was not hiding. She stood in full view, her scent open and unguarded, the amber pendant and iron ring visible against the fabric of her shirt. She had prepared a branch, white cedar, cut from the oldest tree in the grove's southern edge, a tree that had nearly died in the territory's decline and had been the last to recover. She held it loosely in her right hand. Kael stood on the dais. He looked out at his pack, healthy, whole, their scents rich and complex with the restored vitality of their land, and then his eyes found Sable. He stepped down from the dais. The hall went quiet, not the violent silence of the rejection, but a held-breath quiet, the kind that precedes something new. Kael walked to the center of the hall and stopped in front of Sable. He did not speak with the voice of command. He spoke with his own voice, the one that lived beneath the alpha, beneath the politics, beneath the granite mask he wore like armor. "I won't ask you to forgive me in front of this pack," he said. "Forgiveness is not a public act, but I will say this publicly, because you deserve to hear it where everyone can witness." He took a breath. "I was given the rarest gift the shifter world offers, and I threw it away because I was afraid. Not afraid of war, afraid of what the bond demanded. It demanded that I trust something I couldn't control, something I couldn't negotiate or strategize my way through. It demanded that I choose with my heart in a world that taught me to choose with my head." His voice was rough. His hands, at his sides, were trembling. "You walked out of this hall without begging, without breaking, without giving any of us the satisfaction of seeing you suffer. And I have spent every day since trying to understand how a person who had lost everything could walk with more dignity than a man who had everything." The hall was utterly still. "I don't know if the bond can be restored. I don't know if you want it to be. But I know that I choose you not because of what your blood can do for this territory, not because of politics or alliances or power. I choose you because you sat in a dying garden in the middle of the night and made things grow. I choose you because you came back for children you'd never met and a land that had given you nothing but pain." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small, rough-cut piece of amber, not a pendant, not polished, just a raw, unworked stone the color of dark honey. "Joran helped me find this," he said. "It's from your grandfather's grove, the Night Hollow Grove." I asked Rendell for permission. He said the grove would decide. And when I knelt and put my hands on the earth, the tree dropped this into my palm. He held it out to her. Sable looked at the amber. Then she looked at him. Then she looked past him, at the hall full of wolves who had once watched her walk away with nothing. She reached up and unclasped the chain that held the pendant and the ring. She removed the original amber pendant, her mother's, and held it in one hand. Then she took the rough amber from Cale's palm and held it in the other. Both stones pulsed. The light within them strengthened, synchronized, and then began to glow with a warmth that everyone in the hall could feel, not just see, but feel. A wave of resonance that rippled outward from where Sable stood and sank into the stone floor, the cedar pillars, the earth beneath the foundation. The bond not repaired, not restored, but remade settled into place. Not with the violence of the first time, not with the shattering force of recognition. It came like dawn, gradual, inevitable, warm. Sable's eyes filled with tears, and this time she let them fall. "You still have a lot of work to do," she said. Cale's laugh was shaky and wet and real. "I know," he said. "I'll spend the rest of my life doing it." The story does not end with the ceremony. Real stories, the ones that matter, the ones that settle into your bones, don't end with the grand gesture. They end with the morning after. This is what the morning after looked like. Sable woke before dawn in the room above the kitchen. The same narrow room where she had once slept among onions and cold stone, though it had been transformed during her absence into something warmer. Marin had replaced the thin mattress with a proper bed. Osla had hung dried lavender from the ceiling beam. Joran had left a new copy of the North American Wildflower Guide on the nightstand, with a note that said, "The old one was falling apart. This one has better illustrations. J." She dressed and went out to the herb garden. The air was cool and smelled of cedar and damp earth and the green, complex fragrance of a territory coming back to life. The sky was turning pale at its edges, and somewhere in the forest, a bird she couldn't identify was singing a song she didn't recognize. The amber pendant her mother's hung from its chain. Beside it, the rough amber from the grove. Beside that, the iron ring. She knelt in the soil and began to work. An hour later, footsteps. Cale, carrying 2 cups of tea. He sat beside her on the garden wall. He handed her a cup. She took it. "Osla says the rosemary is the healthiest she's seen in 20 years, he said. "Rosemary is resilient. It just needs the right soil." They drank their tea. The sun rose. The garden grew. And somewhere, 300 miles north, in a valley so old that the trees had names, Rendell Voss sat beside his fire and felt the resonance of a bond freely chosen, hard-won, and stronger for having been broken pulse through the earth like a second heartbeat. He closed his eyes. He smiled. And that's where we leave them, not in a moment of triumph, but in a quiet garden at dawn, where the real work of love and trust and healing is only beginning. What do you think was Cale's rejection forgivable, or did Sable let him off too easily? What about Joran the brother who fought when no one else would? And Petra, did she deserve worse than being sent home? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would have done in Sable's place. Would you have walked back into that hall, or would you have stayed in the grove? I'd love to hear your take. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more stories like this coming, stories about wolves and bonds and the messy, beautiful, complicated work of choosing someone, not because the bond demands it, but because your heart does. I'll see you in the next one.